Welcome everyone to our 5th webinar in the series, Are You Ready for the Circular Future? So I'm Alyssa Mick, I'm the founder of Mixi. And today we have Linn Lindfred from Stockholm. She will speak about the DPP, the Digital Product Passport. I know that it's a topic that is interesting for many, and I'm happy to see that there are already many participants in the webinar here today. And Linn is the founder of Circularista. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And so Linn has been involved in many projects related to circular economy, and also now today we'll focus on one of them that is related to the DPP. So thank you very much, Linn, for being here today. And as usual, our session will have also time for questions. So feel free to write in the chat if you have any questions, or then to ask them after the presentation. So yeah, thank you again. And the stage is yours, Linn.
Thank you, Alyssa. Great to be here, and thanks for having me. I'm going to start by explaining a little bit more about me and what I do and what I have been doing. So my journey within circular economy started 7 years ago when I did my master thesis. We investigated how digitalization could be an enabler for circularity. And in particular, we focused on the PLM system, how that could enable circular services and businesses. So we interviewed lots of brands. We focused on the retail and textile industry, and we also interviewed lots of circularity experts. And I was surprised that back then, circular economy was a fairly new concept. The lack of knowledge within this field, both in academia, but also the professional sphere. And we also saw like a gap in terms of businesses and what you could do. So we saw an opportunity for starting a business. So we actually tried to create a startup called Waste to Value. And the idea was to create a digital marketplace for trading with industrial waste. So kind of like a Blocket or an eBay, but for companies and their waste. And we focused on the construction industry because it's a huge need to use their products for longer and minimize the waste. So on that journey, I really learned a lot of like the obstacles and hinders of starting a company within a linear economy that is circular at its core. So it was really difficult to get it going, but I really learned a lot. And I noticed that several others wanted to hear the learnings and insights. So I kind of made that into a consultancy firm instead, which I now call Circularista, as Alyssa said. So in this consultancy, I've been coaching companies on their journey from linear to circular businesses. And I've also been part of several research and innovation projects on the theme of circularity and sustainable innovation. And I have mostly been focusing on construction and textile, two huge industries that are in desperate need of change to more sustainable and circular ones. So just to give like some info what I've been doing, I have one client within a real estate agency called Humlegården, and we've created process and circularity principles for them on how to create more circular projects. And we've also created a way of measuring the circularity in their company. And I've also been part of a research project called Swedish Wool Initiative. Because did you know that 50% of the wool in Sweden is wasted each year? And this is material that has long durability. It is flame retardant, and it's water resistant, and it has isolating quality. So it's a great material to use, not only in textile, but also like in construction for isolation, or there's lots of opportunities of using it, but we don't use it. And that's mostly because, well, we breed sheep because of the meat industry. So that is seen as a byproduct. But I think this is a great example of the inefficiencies of the linear economy. So we try to, well, use more of the Swedish wool. So in that project that I did together with the Axe Foundation, which was my client, and Filippa K, Tiger of Sweden, Fjällräven, Klippan, we tried to investigate how we can create the market conditions for scaling up the the trading of wool in Sweden. So we authored the first classification system for wool in Sweden, or wool standard, as we call it, to help buyers and sellers of wool to speak the same language. And I also think one important thing here that relates to the work I did with waste to value is that the broker will play a huge role in collecting the wool and trading with others so that we can trade at scale. So I wanted to highlight that because I see that even though waste to value was in construction and this is in textile, there are a lot of similarities, such as the broker will have a crucial role in so that we can trade more with materials that we don't use today. But I've also been part of, I've created a course for Halmstad University in how we can create more circular AI-based services together with the professor in design of AI services. So that is also one huge part of this transition, how to use technology in the right way to enable circular processes and business models. That was a part of some of the projects. Do we need to mute someone, maybe? Yeah. Thank you. That's some of the projects, but one project that we will focus on in particular today is the Trace4Value pilot. So Trace4Value is a bigger consortium with almost 65 partners, and it's partly funded by Vinnova, a Swedish state agency. And the focus is to create traceability in sustainable value chains. And there are several work packages. We have one work package within electronics, focusing on digital product passports in electronics, one within traceability in construction, one within food industry. And then we have the work package that I'm part of, which is creating a digital or piloting a digital product passport in textile. And my client in this project is called Trace, who's the project leader. And they are a traceability solution provider, so focusing on traceability in the supply chains of textile companies. So my plan is to go through a little bit of what the digital product passport is, what we did in the pilot, and share some learnings. So I will start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So why is the digital product passport happening? Well, as part of the EU Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan, European Commission has established a law called the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or ESPR. And part of that law is a mandate that all products sold in the EU needs to have a digital product passport attached. And this is part of the EU Green Deal of creating a climate neutral EU until 2050. So the goal of this, to introduce this DPP, is to enable a transition to a circular economy, to help consumers make more sustainable choices, to encourage more sustainable production, to provide new business opportunities, and to simplify the oversights of products by authorities. And I will go into a little bit more these goals and how we can enable them in short. First, I wanted to go through what the digital product passport actually is. Oh, and I'm just going to say that this presentation is also created together with Trace. So the digital product passport, you have a physical product and you have data on that product, such as specific product data, but also data about the materials, the supply chain, compliance, circularity data, or environmental data. And then we need to have a DPP system, where we can store the data in separate data sources, and we can have an interoperable architecture that allows us to share data between data sources and in different machines. So we need to create that scalable infrastructure to enable the sharing of data. And we also need to access this data through some sort of unique identifier, which could be accessed via a data carrier. So if we talk about then how to use this data, who is responsible for what, and who can add data in the system, then we need to talk about the different stakeholders in the DPP world. So first, we have the responsible economic operator, which in this case could be the brand, right? Who are responsible for creating this entire system, responsible for having the data that you need to show in the DPP, who are responsible for having the unique identifier so that and making it accessible. Then we have the authorities who will need to access the product-specific data. They will not necessarily use a data carrier such as a QR code to access the data. They will need to have a copy of the data so that they can make sure that they have all the info that they need. And in terms of how authorities can use this data, is that today we hardly know what type of materials and products that are traded with in the EU. And the only way we can create a circular system is to know what materials are out there. We don't know how much of the textiles is recycled. We have lots of guesstimates today, and we need to fill those gaps. And the DPP data could help us do that. That's really important, not only to create new, more adapted laws, but also to understand what system we have today and how we can create a more sustainable one. Then we have the circular economy operator. This is, for example, a repairer or a recycler. So let's say that you have a product that has a DPP attached and you repair this product. Then the repairer could scan the data on the product or scan the data carrier and get the data of the product so that they know what type of material it's made of, so that they know what type of materials to use in the repair. And in the future, we also want the repairer to be able to add information in the DPP so that they can say that they added a button with this material or added a thread with this material, so that the recycler then can know exactly what material the product contains so that they know how to recycle it. For example, for the recycler, it's super important to know compliance, like if there's any harmful chemicals, so that they know if it can be recycled and how to recycle it. And then we have the consumer, who can access the data of the product via a data carrier, such as a QR code. And this could enable the consumer to make more sustainable choices, but it also enables the brand to communicate with the consumer in a new way. This whole system could also, if it's used in the right way, enable the brand to gather insights and analytics about their products that they can use in the design phase to create more circular and sustainable products. Like, for example, if you have information about repairs and how the product wears and tears throughout the life cycle, then you can know how to make more optimized design for a longer lifetime, for example. So this is a bit like what the goal of the DPP is it's not only a law that says you need to have this data, but you can actually use this as a brand, as authorities, as a circular economy operator, and as a consumer. So that's where you can also create these new business opportunities. So what did we do in the Trace4Value pilot? Well, we provided each product with a unique ID. In this case, we use a serialized GTIN so that we could identify a specific unique product. Then we created QR codes that link to these unique IDs. So we attached the QR codes on each product. In the project, we had, as I said, Kappahl and Marimekko with us, and in total, we labeled 3,000 products that are now on the market. And then via the QR code, the information could be accessed by those who scan it. We do this then? Well, first of all, we needed to prioritize what data to show in the DPP. ESPR has some guidance already, and throughout the project, we had more and more guidance from the ESPR, but we are still waiting on the delegated acts that will detail most of the information that we need. And they will come like 2026, 2028. So this is when we will know exactly what data requirements that we will have. But we used the information that we had and created our own data protocol, because at the moment, there weren't any data protocols out there that included all the requirements from the EU and the ESPR. There are some out there that we looked at, but we created our own that was more comprehensive. And so this data protocol helped us share the data. So we based the data on standards so that we enable interoperability within the system. And then we started building the architecture. So we had a team of developers creating this architecture and infrastructure so that we could collect, link, and share the data. And I will go through that on the next slide. And then we had also to design the consumer interface, which is where the consumer can see the data about the product. And I'll show you that in a bit as well. So what's so special about this project is that to date, as far as I know, almost all of the DPP pilots have been focusing on the consumer interface, right? To visualize the information to the consumer in the best way, but they haven't really focused on that, what's behind that, like the architecture and infrastructure. Because we need to make sure that the data that we store is stored in separate data sources so that we can collect data from the different data sources so that we know that the data is constantly up to date. Like if we think about it, if we're going to scale this system, it's probably not going to work with having one central database. We need those decentralized databases to be able to gather the right information at the right time. But the tricky part here is to make that shareable with all the systems. So that was a huge focus in this project, to create that architecture and infrastructure that is scalable. So this is pretty much what we did on a high level. So when the consumer scans the QR code, it calls to a DPP interface. So it opens up a link in your phone. But in order to know what data to show in this link or in this interface, we send a request to a resolver. The resolver tells us where we can find the data to this unique product. So it tells us in what data sources we need to look to find the data. So that's what it responds with. And then we know where the data is. We can fetch the data via APIs. And then the data shows up on the interface in your phone. And in this project, we used 2 data sources because we wanted to pilot this decentralized data storage system. So we used those in black, as you see here. Those what we used. So we used the Trace platform, their traceability solution that I talked about before, where they store data about the supply chain. But we also used call it a PLM mockup. We used just an Excel where we added the data just for this pilot's sake to be able to test storing data into data sources. But in the future, we can scale this up by using, for example, a brand's PLM system or ERP system or middleware. And we could also use, for example, a certification body or a circularity provider that could add data into the system. So this was like a first step in trying out this scalable DPP system that we need to build. And if we look at the guidance from the ESPR, the decentralized system is what they are recommending. And I also need to say that there's currently an ongoing project called CIRPAS. I don't know if you're aware of that, but they are working together with the EU to create more guidance around this. And they worked like in parallel with our pilot as well, and they are now continuing on. So that's, if you don't follow that project, I urge you to do that because they will come up with more guidance around this. So that was the architecture. Here is then the result. So this is one of the piloted products, a Marimekko t-shirt. And if you use your phones, you can scan the QR code and then you can see the DPP in your phone. So as you can see, the interface we created first, like highlighted sections above, so you can find information quickly, and then you can scroll down and see more detailed product information. So you can yourself like find the information that you're interested in finding. And this was just, we don't have any guidance from the EU on this. So this is just a way of us trying to make it more easy to use from the consumer perspective. So did anyone try it? Did it work for you?
Yes, it works.
Perfect. Great. Then we can continue. So I wanted to then, as you saw in this interface, you saw the different data information categories or data categories. And I wanted to just quickly explain the data protocol because that's a huge part of what you're now seeing on your phones. So the data protocol, we wanted to create a system that would be easy to use and enable data to be shared. So we created 9 info groups, and this is then based on the ESPR text. But I mean, the ESPR text is more describing what type of information we need. But we saw that if they described one information point, then we would need several different data fields to fulfill that information requirement. So this is our way of creating a comprehensive system. And so we have 9 info groups, which is information about the brand. That could be, for example, the name of the brand. Then we have supply chain information, name of the supplier, for example. We have product information, for example, the identification system that we use. In this case, we use the GTIN. It could be information about the product's material, for example, the components, if it's a body, trim, or lining fabric. Then we have an info group called digital identifier. This is to explain what type of data carrier that we use. If it is a QR code or if it's an NFC chip or RFID thread. We don't know exactly what type of data carrier, if there will be one that is used or several. Like, for example, we use the QR code in the pilot because it is easy for the consumer to scan. But if we talk about the recycler, for example, they will not be able to scan a QR code on each garment. They need to scan in bulk. So for them, they would need to have RFID. So, well, my guess is that you will need to use a combination of data carriers. But I mean, the recycler would need to know what type of data carrier it is so that they know how they can recycle the garment. We have care information, for example, a care image. And we have compliance information, for example, if there are any harmful substances. Then we have something we call circularity information. It could be, for example, something called performance, like what is the performance or durability of the product? We know that the ESPR will come out with some sort of requirements around this, but as you can see, it says TBC, to be concluded. That's because we don't know that yet. So the data protocol is not ready entirely yet because we don't have that guidance from the EU. The same goes with some parts of sustainability information, such as how to measure the carbon dioxide emission. Should we use like PEF or should we use something else? And then how should we use it? The guidance there is a bit unclear as well. So there you have like the definitions, and in total we have 125 data points in this data protocol. And feel free to download the protocol. It's available for free just by scanning the QR code. So some learnings from this pilot. Well, starting time. Both Marimekko and Kappa learned that it is quite of a big hassle to implement the DPP, and also now because we don't know everything yet, but we know enough to start. And I believe that if you don't start now, it might be too late then, like you might lag behind. And starting now also enabled like the brands in this pilot to see that, well, there's really necessary to have a close collaboration with all stakeholders, and also that having some sort of project and passport that is more concrete made it easier for all the departments in the company to actually understand how that would impact their department, and to understand that they could actually get value from this as well, such as marketing in communication with the consumer, and such as the IT department to really understand like how they would need to to update their system in order to enable this to be implemented. We know that standards are super important for this to evolve and to be scalable. And we know that there's currently ongoing projects with the Swedish Institute of Standards to create the standards necessary for the DPP system to evolve. So they're not here yet. There are already some here, but we need more standards to enable this interoperable system. And then it's super important to also stay up to date with coming clarification from the EU, because we know the delegated acts are coming. We know that more information is coming, and well, find a way to stay up to date with this updates. And then I think this other benefits for brand is super important to highlight. I think that many see the DPP as necessary evil, like it's something that's going to be regulated, so we just need to fix it. But I would say that it's almost impossible to be part of this circular value chain if you don't have the right data to support it. And this DPP is enabling that. So I think it's really crucial to also try to investigate the benefits for you as a company in this shift. So how can you start preparing? Well, in this project, we created a DPP playbook, as we call it. It describes the why, how, and what of the digital product passport. So it pretty much deep dives into what I've been talking about today. And it was authored by Brooke Roberts Islam, and we've all been part of like contributing to the content. And you can download it for free by using the QR code as you see here. Sorry. And then after like having established the ground rules and the being up to date with the current situations on the DPP, it's time to identify the data. Identify the data that you already have available and identify the data that you need to find or that you lack today. And by doing so, one idea could be to download the protocol that we created in this pilot to see what type of data requirements there are out there and how you can collect them. And then involve all the stakeholders necessary. You would need to involve all the suppliers in the value chain, as well as all the departments of your company. And then one important aspect is also to identify a solution partner. I think it will pop up several solution partners offering the DPP as a service, because I think that would be very difficult to do as a brand that does not have that in its core. So that will also be an important aspect of scaling this and implementing it. And yes, that was a short description of what we've done and what the DPP is.
Thank you, Linn. That was really, really interesting, and a lot of comments and questions in the chat. So
okay, great.
Definitely people are interested to hear more.
Oh, I'm just going to say now I forgot, but we have a webinar also. I will find the link and put it in the chat as well about the playbook, and have like a panel discussion around that as well, I think in next week. So
that's great. Okay.
Yeah.
We can share it also on the Mixi page. So then it's yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, so where should I start? So Charles, you had some comments specifically about the wool, but also about the DPP. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, you can pick up the comments about the wool later. It's actually Sweden is not in the top 6. So from a wool point of view, it's not a major player in Europe. But my qualms are around how the whole EU deal has been interacting with wool. Wool is something that makes me really afraid, because the French system for the environmental impact assessments punishes wool unfairly compared to everything else. Now, I know that PEFs isn't what you're talking about, but PEFs are part of the EU Green Deal alongside the DPP. can you give me any assurance that I should have faith that wool might get a decent reading?
Ooh. No, I can't give you any assurances, but I mean, we actually did, as part of the Swedish Wool Initiative, we did a LCA on the wool in Sweden. And because the practices that is used in Sweden could ensure that the carbon dioxide emission, that the environmental impact was lowered in comparison to other practices.
I've actually seen a copy of that from Joel in Sweden.
Okay.
Joel and Kirsty have actually sent it. I'm a bit of a wool head. And you've been doing really good work. But yeah,
that's great to hear.
That was my but if I can squeeze in a secondary question, which was later on, I said, are we definitely going RFID and not NFC or QR codes? Have we yet got a decision, or are we covering every base?
Yeah, we haven't gotten a decision yet, as far as I know. In the playbook, I tried to do like a pros and cons list of the different tagging methods. And I think that everything that we've seen so far is that EU is leaning more towards QR codes. But I mean, it's not, we need RFID or something else for the recycler. So I think there will be a combination, but I don't know about NFC tags. We did another project with Philippa K, where we collected used garments. We added NFC tags on the used garments and added information in the NFC tag, like not in the production, but after they had been used. And then we used that as communication to the consumer. So we tried that in another project as well.
I've seen the Philippa K project as well, because that came through Chelsea. That came through University of London, Becky Early. But you've answered my questions. Thank you ever so much.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Thank you for just giving us an update on what we do need to know.
Thank you. You're welcome, and great questions.
So I'm trying to address the comments and questions according to the order in the chat. So Sari, I think you're the next. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Thank you. Very interesting presentation, and you kind of answered to my question as well, but still. So I'm kind of looking at this whole, the process of implementing this the digital product passport from the supply chain and the process re-engineering perspective. So basically, what is your experience so far? Is that what level of let's say the company internal, or considering the end-to-end supply chain and any of the stakeholders within? So how much this kind of process re-engineering there is needed from the company perspective itself to be able to produce the digital passport, and also that the companies which are let's say planning to go through for instance an ERP deployment and are building up more kind of centralized database, is that they could actually take the digital passport or undertaking together with the ERP deployment, or this kind of a project.
Well, I'll see if I can answer your questions, because the first one, in the project, we, Kapala and Marimekko noticed that it required some replanning in the processing facilities in order to enable attaching the QR codes, like having the right QR codes on the right unique identifiers on the right garments. So that required some re-engineering on their part in the production facilities. But as we had label suppliers in the project as well, and for them it's not difficult to create these QR codes and create these serialized sheet-ins. But the difficulty would be to rearrange like the production process to actually attach them to the garments. But it was not something that couldn't be done. It was just it required some time and some extra education for the production workers.
And also that what I'm kind of that interesting and why I'm asking is that because obviously I'm kind of very interested about the data, that what you're able to generate through the this whole end-to-end process, and because the data is important for the business and the companies themselves as well, that how they can what you also mentioned is that what's the durability of the garments and or the materials utilized, so that they can also develop their own, let's say, production, method strategies, or vision for the companies that where they're going. So basically, is that the data what they get, or in order to get it, in order to build up their businesses.
Yeah.
So so that was also I was kind of interested at how do you build up the capability for that, and then what kind of changes you need to do.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's super difficult because we saw that there's a huge data gap today. We don't have the data that the ESPR requires, and they can't even define the data points. Right. And also the green claims coming out saying that you need to really support the data that the information that you show to the consumer makes more and more brands aware and make them not want to show too much data because they need to be able to back it up. And today they're not able to back it up because they don't have that data. So I think a huge part of this is to, as I say, find the data that you already have, and then create a strategy for finding the data that you don't have. But it's super difficult to do today since you don't even know exactly how the information requirements will be defined.
And
but
also
you can start.
And also is that that when you have the data, so what data do you share, or you're willing and able to share, from the let's say the confidentiality perspective as well.
Exactly. So we need to see a more guidance in what type of data should we show to the consumer, what type of data should we show to the authorities, so that we know like what to show in the interface and not. We don't have that guidance yet, so we chose ourselves. The data you see when you scan the QR code is the data we chose. We thought would be interesting for the consumer to see. But we need guidance for what data are we allowed to show to the consumer, and vice versa. So that's also something that needs to come. But I think that would be probably the biggest issue. As you say, finding the right data, understanding how to answer to the information requirements in the ESPR, and try to understanding how to measure like the PEF and the durability score and the performance. Like, how do we do that? What data do we need? So that will be difficult, but I say start is the best way.
Thank you, because I kind of that wanted to know as well is that did you find the answer to this big question when you were working on it? But
I mean, since that data is not available and that data is not defined, we couldn't really test it, right? But we could test the data that was available and see how we could share that data.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think the next is Alison. You had a few comments and questions. Would you like to be next?
Hello, I'm Alison. I'm from the newly named Global Circular Network. So I would just be thrilled to work with you, Linn, because we have developed, I guess, parallel to what you're doing, but also in conjunction with the tools. So we have interconnected RFID thread, QR code, and NFC. So all three of them work all in parallel together. And so I would just love to work with you. This is the RFID thread here, which is the world's first. So it's washable, withstands 200 degrees, can go in carpets to textiles and last the whole product through, but also the object itself is circular. So by the time it gets to the recyclers, they do the final scan, get it back, see that there's still, it's still operable. And then we're able to reset, rescan, resell. So that can go into products like homewares and mattresses and and toys, to engage that industry. And so that's why we're looking for collaboration, because at the end of the day, it is all going to be about the economies of scale. And so I happen to be here in India too at the moment, but looking and about to do some exciting EU country announcements, looking for global circular partnerships so we can literally help and work together to roll this out. Because the concern that I have heard, I think most of when I was attending all the Surpass meetings, was that in reality, 99.8% of brands, fashion brands in the EU are SMEs, and over 80% of those are micro businesses. And it's been said as many as 40% of those will struggle and
Yeah.
potentially might have to close just to do the compliance reporting. So yeah, I would be thrilled to work with you guys, because that's essentially what it is. But one of my questions is also about the open source, because we really do want to keep it open source, but the importance is also to keep the IP attached for the brands, because we can attach our tools through a digital software bridge that is collapsed and then reconnected and disconnected as it travels around a circular economy. But once it gets to the circular economy, meaning the R recyclers, everyone, we're doing a free access. And so that's, you know, to make it open source. So that is, I guess, one of my questions in regards to your software and its accessibility by everybody, if it will be open source.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that TrustRace will need to answer. I'm not sure. So from TrustRace standpoint, those who have been developing the architecture, they are now, the project hasn't ended yet. It's going to end in this fall. And then after that, they will have to like see the results and see how can we go with this forward. Should this be open source? Should this be something that would be in our core, or should we like, is there somebody else that should take this forward? So
yeah, because it's the data is, as you said, I mean, it's enormous. And
Yeah.
then also we've got to think about how we keep our footprint down just
Yeah.
from the capturing and keeping the data alone. So brilliant presentation. And yeah, I'm really, really excited to be able to work with you guys, and
Yeah.
especially with this upcoming EU announcements with some countries that I'd love to work with you guys. So
yeah, we
thank
should
you for the
definitely
presentation.
talk after. That
Thank
would be
you.
great. Thanks.
I love these international collaborations.
Yeah.
Jana, would you like to ask, or should I read your question? Okay, I can read it. Have you heard of textile or material scanners? So we don't need to have tagging systems. And there is one example here.
Yeah, is it like using AI or like a image recognition and using AI to identify the garment material? I guess.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean yeah, that's really interesting too. And I think that's something the recyclers, like, to scale up the recycling, is using as well. So I mean, in that case, they wouldn't maybe need the RFID tag to scan if they can get the information that they need on that way. But I don't know how, I haven't investigated how that could be, how the DPP could be incorporated in that somehow. I have no idea, but it's really interesting to use that technology for that purpose.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could also use the image recognition to, that's what we talk about in the course that I created with Circular AI-based services. You could use image recognition and AI to understand what you can do with the product after it's been used. So to understand in the sorting step, if it should go to repair or recycling or donation, and not having to involve the physical person to do that. So I think that that technology could really be enable the scaling up of this circular value chain.
By the way, Linn, you mentioned that you have this course about the AI and circularity. So is it open for everyone to register?
Actually, it's, since it's in a Swedish university, it's free for everyone who has attended university in Sweden.
Okay.
And I actually don't know, but I can send you a link here. And
Yeah, just curious because it sounds really interesting. I'm
but
sure that it's interesting for many.
It's 3 credits, like from in this Swedish university standpoint. So
yeah. And I have also a question. Do you have already feedbacks from the users? Because of course for them it's like a new world.
yeah, so we gathered some feedback when we created the interface, some test users, and then we are now gathering some analytics, like how many has scanned the QR codes, where, and so forth. But we don't have the results on that yet. But the thing, I think that consumers will be, on the one hand, they require more transparency and will be interested in this information. And I've read studies that show that consumers are willing to pay extra for sustainability, but they require transparency in return. But we've also seen that consumers might not scan the DPP. We've also seen that this might not maybe be the, all people won't really weigh in the information in the DPP and in their purchasing decisions. So it is actually a great question, and I'm self wondering, how will this actually make consumers make more sustainable purchases or not, or will they not scan the garment? And in this pilot, like we have to think of that this is small scale. We have a limited funding. If we would do this on a bigger scale, we would of course market this a lot more. So if you as a consumer go into the Kappahl store and you buy that product and it's not marketed really, like it's not so visible that it is a DPP on that garment, it's attached on the care label. So if you as a consumer don't really usually look at the care label, then you wouldn't find the DPP unless it says like a big screen with scan this DPP, right? So it's also part of like that marketing process as a brand to actually show that, to make the consumer care. So I think that's what we will see in this pilot, that maybe like if you don't talk about this, the consumer won't be aware.
Yes. It will be interesting to see if consumers prefer products that they have already, that have already the DPP.
Yeah.
And access to the data. Rika, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Lynn. Thanks for the presentation. So I think actually now linked to this, what was just said, kind of around, because we're kind of saying that the DPP is the enabler for circularity. So here the link to the consumer actually reading the code and maybe taking action and almost like creating new events for the DPP or creating sort of the circular services around the product. I think I have maybe even two questions, or a little bit your reflection on this. Is like, did you see almost like during this pilot, did you identify opportunities? Maybe this one was one where you're just saying that maybe if there could be some form of a loyalty program linked to those products, and then when you read it, and that would kind of incentivize you to read the code, maybe something related to resale event. So maybe one, was there something linked to this or discussed during the pilot, or what was your kind of your personal almost like view or opportunity that you maybe identified when working on this pilot?
Yeah, that's, I think a great opportunity would be to help spur the secondhand sale of the garments from the consumer standpoint, so C2C, so that if you have more information about the garment when you sell it secondhand, you can price it more accordingly. You know that the buyer, there will be full transparency about the product and its materials, and that would like facilitate that process as well. Not only from if the brand collects the garments, but also from the consumer standpoint, to be involved in the circular economy in an easier way, because it's all about making it easy for the consumer. Like I'm part of several of these secondhand groups, like on Facebook, and you also, you need to find like the materials, you need to find everything about it. But if you could just like, here's the QR code, here you can find everything about the garment, and this is the price. Like that could be like a great opportunity for like scaling that as well for the consumer.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess this is where, do you see these things could be kind of as a follow-up for the pilot now, or for this one already, but did you not kind of go to that side of the sort of the downstream events?
Yeah.
And
we only focused on the production to the communication with the consumer, like, so we did not look at the rest of the circular value chain in this project. But as I said, we did a project just before that, where we created that digital system for adding information after the product had been used. Because we will have a system with DPPs on several products, but not all of them. Like the products that will be sold secondhand will probably not have DPPs on them. Like it will take several years until we get there. So in that project, we took back the products and then attached not really a DPP, but kind of a DPP with information. But that process was a lot more time consuming because we needed to find the data after the garment had been produced. So more time consuming, but we also saw that it was still a valid business case to add that data into the product. And it also increased the value of the product sold secondhand because you could be more transparent towards the buyer. So that we try to, in this case, we are going to try to merge those and see what are the insights we can get from this, having done both ways, adding the DPP in the production and adding the DPP on already sold products.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess the authentication part comes at play in the second, like even if it hasn't been there at the start, but then at this resale where the authenticating the product is actually a big, well, at least that will be interesting part to test, I guess, if that actually, Yeah, definitely. And I think we've seen more of the high-end products already using this, like they need to be able to authenticate the garments. So for them, this will be great to be able to have that. Yeah, great. Sounds good.
Linn, from your experience now with Marimekko and of course other brands, so what is their what is the biggest challenge they see in this transition?
Great question. I think that a challenge that they saw, I need to say we have interviews with both Kappahl and Marimekko in the playbook, so you can read more about their insights there in more detail. But I think like in the beginning, they thought that, well, the knowledge was not really there. So that the biggest challenge was like the knowledge gap, like how will we do this? How can we do? After the pilot, I think the insights were that more of the stakeholders need to be involved, more of the department, and insights were that they saw value in this from several different parts of the company. I think the biggest challenge is still finding the data, knowing how to handle the data, and involving all actors in the value chain. And then one obstacle we realized was, for example, since we created this decentralized data system, one of the brands updated their e-com. And then that broke the link. Then we couldn't see the picture of the garment in the interface. So, if we create this scalable system and one part in that chain updates something, we need to make sure that it works. So that's also a big issue. Like, how is EU really planning on scaling this and making it work throughout the whole EU with several different DPP solution providers working with several different brands that has all different types of systems? That's a big challenge that I think that we didn't think about until after it happened.
So yeah, the decentralized model is maybe a challenge. Like some level, it needs to be centralized in order for the connections to stay like managed. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Definitely. And like we also have this a big obstacle is like we will get more information about who will be able to access the data when. We don't know that yet. Like how will we create those? How will we authorize so that the right actor can access the right data? How will we create that system? That's not clear either. And how will we make sure that the data is up to date if a product goes out of production, for example? Where can we store that data as a backup? And when will be the time we need to create a new DPP for a product? Like say, for example, it's been used and it's been resold, and then it's been refurbished, remanufactured, so that the old data from the first production is maybe not even relevant. Should we create a new DPP, and who will be responsible for that? So that's also like, there's a lot of questions still, but I think that the best way of answering them is to just try, because that's when you learn.
Yeah, I was just thinking that piloting is the only way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alison, you asked in some point, are there any other pilots coming in the future?
Actually, I think that Trace is open to seeing if there are pilots that want to test this more at scale. If we can have more brands joining, gathering more data and really scaling this up, that would be really interesting. So I think that if you have any suggestions, then that would be great. And then I think that a lot of things will happen now with the Surpass 2 project. So, and also the standards coming in. So I think that a project that builds on those findings as well, that will be really interesting. But at the moment, we haven't scheduled anything. So, but we're open for it.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are in the end of our hour. Thank you, Linn. It was really, I think that's the best way to kind of to learn, because, you know, we can read a lot about the DPP and to kind of try to understand what does this regulation even mean, but then to hear about, of course, like a use case, is the best way. And thank you all for the great questions, and thank you also, Linn, for the link to the webinar. So we'll post it also on Mixi. And yeah, and we'll have our last webinar about repair. It will be on the 19th or 26th. So when it's finalized, we'll publish about it. So welcome, of course, everyone. And it's connected also to the DPP, of course, because Linn, as you mentioned, that's part of the thing. So thank you, and have a nice evening or morning wherever you are, and see you in our next webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thank you, Linn.
Bye.